Hello, Drunk Theology fans. I'm back and ready to move on. We were last week studying chapter 5 of Revelation on the unveiling of the Messiah. And so now we are looking at that. But before I get into this, remember to go ahead and click the subscribe button in YouTube and also notifications. That way you know what's going on. And, go over to my Patreon page to help support the ministry of Drunk Theology. And if you're watching this on Instagram, just go to my bio and you'll be able to go there. Also, remember to look up, if you don't have time to watch this video, you can go ahead and go to any of the podcasts. Look for Drunk Theology. Pretty much I'm under about 8 of them, and they're all scheduled around here. You'll see them, popping up. So anyway, without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and get started here with Revelations chapter 6. Last week we covered the unveiling of the Lamb, who is also the Lion, and the Lion of the tribe of Judah, but the Lamb of God, which was slain for the sins of the world. And, John was lamenting the fact that there was no one to open the seals, and then said, no, behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah is ready to open the seals because he is worthy, because he is also the Lamb. And so we're going to watch that here in Revelation chapter 1. It says here, now, I watched when the Lamb opened up one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures say with a voice like a thunder, "Come!" And he looked, and behold, a white horse, and its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he came out to conquer and to conquer. And when he'd opened up the 2nd seal, I heard the 2nd living creature say, "Come!" And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that the people should slay one another. To him he was given a great sword. And when he had opened the 3rd seal, I heard the living creature say, "Come!" And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures say, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of a barley for a denarius, and do not harm the wine and the oil." And when he'd opened up the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature say, "Come!" And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and its rider was named Death, and Hades followed him. And they were given authority over 1/4 of the earth to kill with the sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by wild beasts of the earth. So I'm going to stop there. We may go on, finish out the chapter, but what I want to talk about is this is what is commonly referred to as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. It's a lot of interesting little things are taken up, little titles, and makes the title of books, and it makes the title of movies, but it also has its root in the scripture. And what is, or who are, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse? And what does it have to do with the seals? Well, if you remember, the scroll that the Lamb is opening is the judgment of God being revealed for future events. And some of them have precursor events that were types that looked like it. Some of them have not yet been. But we will see that it all serves as a warning. It all serves as something for us to keep our eyes open and our hearts open to understanding what God is communicating to his people. Remember, this is really the revelation of Jesus Christ, the revelation of the Messiah, to the world, but it also is a reminder and to the people of God, and a warning from the people of God to be ready. These times are coming. and who knows how they're going to pan out. As I've said before in this series, and I'll say it again, I think it bears repeating. We can get really caught up in thinking that, we know ... this is going to happen here, this is going to happen here, this is going to happen here. And we don't know. I mean, that's the thing about prophecy. We see how it's laid out, but we don't know exactly how it's going to manifest itself in the world, how it's going to become reality. How, as in heaven above, so below. As above, so below. That's one of the things that the Lord said that we are to pray. In what we call the Lord's Prayer. Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So as it is above, so below. And so the thing is, God's will is going to take place. And what's taking place in the heavenly will reveal itself, but we don't know exactly how that's going to manifest. We don't know exactly how that's going to take place in our world. And so, for example, who would have thought that Ezekiel's dry bones was going to be, what seemed to be the destruction of God's chosen people at the hands of the Nazis, to all of a sudden in 1948 them becoming a nation after not having a nation or a homeland for almost 2,000 years. No one saw that coming. No one saw that coming. And not in the way that it was now. We knew that it was going to take place, but we didn't know how it was going to take place. And that was, 70 years ago now. So we don't know, we can't say this happened, this happened, this happens. So we have to look and say, what can we learn from this prophetic word that has been given down to us so that we can begin to observe and see what's going on. Now, here in the four horsemen of the apocalypse, we see the breaking of the first seal, and it's representative of war, and its aspect of war with regard to the subjecting of people to one another. And we're going to see the aspects of war in the second horseman as well. But it's more regarding hatred between nations and individuals, which I think is very interesting. I think we're seeing some precursors in that in this day and age. So we see number 3, the horseman there talks about the inequity of goods, and we can see that taking place in our society. And number 4, the death which will arise from the 3 wars and the wild beasts that are going to be released and the plagues. We'll cover that a little bit more in detail here in a moment. So this section, really kind of relates to what we've seen already. For example, in the book of Leviticus, chapter 16, verses 14 through 26, when the writer there talks about how God's going to have a preserved people, regardless of the fact that they are not perfect in any way, shape, or form. But it's going to be preserved because of the blood that is offered in Yeshua. So that's the thing. Also, we find that the ravagers that we're going to see here, we find that in the books of Jeremiah and Ezekiel. And so let's look at some of these riders for a moment. The rider of the first one's the white horse, and some people think that that's Christ, but it really not really a good representation there. I don't believe that to be the case personally. I think because it's him, it's been given to go ahead and create war. It says to him was given a bow and a crown, and it was given to him to go out to conquering and to conquer. And so, some people say, he has conquered through the blood, and he's conquered the propagation of the gospel, but that's not really what, it doesn't fit the narrative, okay, to use a word that is used quite a bit today regarding politics. It doesn't fit the narrative. It doesn't fit the narrative here. On these four horsemen, the white horse is going out to make war and to conquer, and to cause there to be a conquering of the people. I think we're seeing those kinds of saber rattlings going on all over the world, at this time, we see that happening between the superpowers and the superpowers that be. Really, Russia is a superpower still, but it really is more the CCP, the Communist Chinese Party, or the Chinese Communist Party, that really seems to be incredibly growing power, not only militarily but through economics. And so we're seeing all sorts of saber rattling taking place, and who knows what's going to happen. Who knows? All the thing is, we need to be aware of what's taking place in our world. The second one, because man, I'll tell you, just to get off track here for a second, if we are to see destruction, it could come at that. They're the largest population of any one single people in the world, and they could create havoc throughout the world if they so desired. So, we need to be aware of those types of things and be aware of our relationship politically, what our people are doing, what other peoples of the world and governments are doing with regard to those kinds of alliances and relationship. But what's most important is that we're aware of what's going on, and to be prayerful and to be mindful of these things. So let's look at the second rider. It says, I heard the second rider say, "Come," and he says, "and behold, it was a bright red horse, and from him it was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that people should slay one another, and a great sword." And so we find that the second rider is also doing war, but it's more of an individualistic representation, it seems, because it said people would slay one another and turn against one another. And we're kind of seeing some of that potential take place in even in our own country. The hatred and the divide that has come between peoples, between races, because we're, it's funny to be an American. It's not an individual race, Yeah, it was founded by Anglo-Saxon people, but with the idea that anybody and everybody can come here. And so now we have a country that's made up of a multiplicity of races, and somehow there has just been this tumult that has come up between them. In fact, I remember a number of years ago speaking with a person in law enforcement in let's put it this way, just more on a higher government level, and he said that that major cities in the United States, the reason that the reason that you see the escalation of the militarization of the police departments is because of a concern of what they see as the potential for race wars in our own country. And at the time, this was like 25 years ago, I thought, it seems extreme. But boy, things seem to be moving in that direction, and that's something we need to be, prayerfully aware of. And so we see that here it says that to him, the people should slay one another. So that's speaking within its own context of its own nation, not so much going out to other nations. The white horse is conquering everyone and And who knows how that could be played out. My gosh, it could be played out in so many different ways. Maybe it's already been played out, and then we're actually looking at what's happening in the red horse beginning to foment. I mean, it's amazing how you can look at all this. But the scriptures are given to give us warning, to say, keep an eye for this, watch out, be wise, don't be unwise concerning these things. And so here he moves on, and he says the third seal was opened up, and it says, come, and I looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, a quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine. What's interesting, you see, is that this isn't so much famine, although famine does take place in wars. What seems to be is that there's still an economic system going on, but it's not a fair system. Because if we remember, like some of the for example, let's say Matthew chapter 20 verse 2, some of the teachings of Jesus, some of the parables he told. In verse 2 of Matthew chapter 20, he says, and after agreeing with the laborers for a denarius, a day's wages, a denarius for a day, he sent them into the vineyard. So the concept here being, because this was written during that time frame of what a denarius value is, a denarius was how much you earned in a day. And you were going to take a day's wages and just be able to buy 3 quarts of barley, or maybe a day's wages and buy a quart of wheat. In other words, all you're doing is making bread, and you're measuring it out by weight, which according to Leviticus, when you measure bread out by weight, that's a curse, because you should have plenty of bread. And so we find that this is what's being talked about in this situation, that there's an inequity here. And the reason we know there's an inequity, because he says, this is what this is how it's going to be. You're not going to be able to you're barely going to be able to afford to eat, but there's still going to be oil and wine, and you're not to harm it. In other words, you're not even to meddle with it. You're not even to get involved with it. You can't be spending any of your money on these luxuries of oil and wine. You're unable to. There's no way for you to do it. But the interesting thing is the oil and wine is still around. So who's getting the oil and wine? Well, the truth is, during these types of wars, the rich, they're cushioned by their wealth. They're cushioned from the effects of economic inequality, and they're cushioned from the scarcity because they're very wealthy. But the poor, they're going to have to pay a day's wages just to make some bread. That is scary. One of the interesting things right now during this pandemic period, we have all these social programs and pandemic programs, and keeping people at least having money in their pocket. An additional $300 a week to your unemployment, and you're probably already getting maybe $300 to $600 a week for your unemployment, and you're getting an additional $300 a week. And what has happened is the consumption of alcohol has skyrocketed in the United States. And so we're not yet at the place where our economic hardship is stopping us from getting involved. But then again, who knows? Because one of the interesting things, and I was sharing this with a friend of mine, one of the interesting things about the dynasties of China was the reason they were able to fall to the communist Chinese Communist Party. The reason they were able to fall was because there was such a disparity between the poor and the rich. And the rich were so bored I'm putting everything in a nutshell. That one of their luxuries was the use of opium. Smoking opium was like a luxury. It was a thing to do. It was like the classy thing to do. But what wound up happening over a period of years is they all became a bunch of addicts. And so they stopped caring for the people, and as they stopped caring for the people and making sure everything was properly run, the people got even more disparaged and more into poverty, and it allowed for the rise of this party that said, "Hey, we're going to make everybody be equal." And of course that hasn't worked out too good for them so far. There are there's a lot of horrible things happening in China within its government, and it's just the way that it is. But the bottom line is they were able to rise to power because of this disparity. And perhaps we are going to find ourselves in that kind of disparity if we don't wake up as the people of God and begin to pray and begin to seek God for this nation. It's incredibly important, because we see the economic disparity happening, and we need to begin to pray as never before for our government leaders in our nation. And for the peace of Jerusalem, very important, because right now there's a lot of tumultuous stuff going on there, and we need to, politically speaking, and we need to really begin to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, pray for our leaders, and that they would get an epiphany that God would just knock them down. Look, and you're going towards destruction. That God would send a voice, a prophet that they will hear and listen and give heed to. All right, so let's go to the fourth voice, and I think we're going to cover that and close out this section for today, and we'll cover the rest of the chapter next week. But he says, "When he opened the fourth seal, I heard a voice of the fourth living creature say, 'Come,' and I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him. And they were given authority over a fourth of the earth, to kill with the sword and with famine and with pestilence and by wild beast." Wow, that is scary. It's interesting. The word pale here really could be translated pallid, a pallid horse. I don't know why it was translated pale, but it's interesting when you look at, especially when you look at rabbinical commentaries and Messianic Jewish commentaries. It literally means a sickly or a green pale horse, a green horse. And the greenness is always the sign of death. And death causes the face to turn green. And so, as is written in the Talmud, referring to the angel of death, they throw in the mouth of the dying the drop which has caused death, and his skin and his face became green. So we find references to that, and here John is referring to what he saw. That this pale horse was there, and the rider's name is Death. Just, can you imagine if all this kind of war were to break out over a fourth of the earth? The pestilence that would take place, and if you could imagine the kind of biological warfare. I mean, there are those those who are into conspiracy theories, and that's, conspiracy theories are not necessarily untrue. Just their truth is hidden if it's true. Or it could be that it's not true. But if it's a genuine conspiracy, the fact that this virus that is able to mutate and do what it's doing, came out of a lab, over, in Wuhan. And so, if that's true, that it was intentionally released, how awful, how scary. The pestilence, And then when we look at the killer hornets that are now invading the Northwest, I don't know if you've seen them, man. They're huge, and they're from China. And it's like, wow, that is bizarre. And we're trying to get a handle on that, the pestilence. And it says death was given over to him to kill a fourth of the earth with sword, with famine. Famine, is the result of war. And we've seen that, there's a strong warning about the financial inequity. And if you have financial inequity combined with war that creates famine, how great is that inequity? How horrible a time this will be. And it's not unheard of. When we look at the atrocities of the 20th century, and we look at what took place in Europe and in Russia and in Eastern Europe, it wasn't all the Nazis. We want to just blame the Nazis, but it wasn't all them. There was a big hand of the Russians, in destroying their own people, and it's horrible. It's stuff that you have to really be a student of history to begin to dig into a lot of the stuff, because it's stuff that's not covered normally. So, the pestilence, the famine, by the wild beast of the earth. I don't think we've seen any of that yet, but I'll tell you, I believe we see precursors right now to this time that's going to come in the future. But the precursors are the preparation phase for what happens. It gets us ready. It prepares us mentally and emotionally. People are used to, here we are a free nation. I'm not going to say we are, but we're getting our freedoms slowly eroding, and it's just a preparation for this type of event. It's a precursor. So we need to be aware, and we need to be prayerful, and we need to know that the words of Jesus are true. That he that endures to the end will be saved. We need to keep our faith in him, not in man. Yes, God raises up men, but it is our faith in God, our faith in what he will do if his people will humble themselves, turn from their wicked way, and pray. We need to begin to do that as never before, church. As never before, saint of God, as never before, follower of Christ. Begin to really take some time, maybe a day during the week, where you're going to just seek the face of God and be in his presence. Amen. All right. So I'm going to leave it there. I know it's kind of a scary place, and it's going to get scarier when we cover the rest of the chapter next week. But take heart. He has overcome the world. And because he has overcome, we are more than conquerors in him. Amen? All right. Well, God bless you. Keep safe. Stay healthy. Get healthy. Shalom.